My fiancé texted me late at night. I need time to understand what my heart wants. I replied with one calm message, canceled the ceremony hall reservation, shifted cities for work, and months later, she discovered time doesn't always pause where people leave. I need time to understand what my heart wants. That was the entire message. No explanation before it. No follow-up after it. Just 11 words sent at 1:47 in the morning by the woman I was supposed to marry in 6 weeks. I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand the words. I understood every single one of them. I read it 3 times because I was making sure I was feeling what I thought I was feeling, which wasn't panic, wasn't rage, wasn't the kind of desperate spiral where a man starts typing paragraphs at 2 a.m. begging for answers. What I felt was something quieter than all of that. Something closer to the feeling you get when you've been waiting for a sound for a very long time, and it finally comes, and now you can stop listening. I put my phone face down on the nightstand. I stared at the ceiling for maybe 40 minutes. Then I picked the phone back up, typed 1 sentence, and hit send. After that, I turned the light off and went to sleep. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. I was 29 at the time. Cassie was 27. We had been together for 3 years and engaged for 11 months. The wedding was scheduled for the first Saturday in October, a hall downtown, 70 guests, a rehearsal dinner the Friday before, a honeymoon in Portugal already half paid for. By any external measure, we were the couple that had things figured out. People said that at dinner parties. You two seem like you actually have it together. I used to smile at that. By that August, I had stopped smiling at it. Here is something nobody tells you about the months before a wedding that's quietly falling apart. Everything still looks exactly the same on the surface. The save the dates go out. The caterer sends a confirmation email. Your mother asks about centerpieces. Her mother calls to discuss floral arrangements, and the two of you stand side by side in the kitchen while she puts her on speaker, and the conversation is completely normal, and you smile at the right moments, and afterward Cassie says, "That went well," and you agree. Because it did go well. On the surface. And meanwhile, the person you're marrying has started answering your texts a little slower than she used to. She laughs at your jokes a half-second too late. She's on her phone more when you're in the same room. Not dramatically. Not in ways you can point to without feeling paranoid. Just a shift. Like the furniture in a room has been moved 2 inches to the left and nobody told you. You keep bumping into things. You keep looking for the displaced chair. You keep thinking, something is different in here and I cannot name it. And because you love this person, and because you are 3 weeks out from mailing the final guest list, and because the venue deposit is already paid and the dress is already ordered and the hotel room block is already reserved, you do not name it. You let yourself believe it is pre-wedding stress, which is real and documented and has a reasonable explanation. You let yourself believe that the slight chill that has moved in is seasonal, temporary, the kind of thing that blows through and leaves. You let yourself believe in the weather. Even when, some part of you suspects, you are standing in the eye. I noticed it first around May. We'd been doing the usual, apartment together, work, dinner, weekends, the rhythm of 2 people who had successfully merged their lives into one shared calendar. It was a Wednesday, ordinary in every way. I had left work early, which I almost never did. Wanted to cook dinner at home instead of doing our usual takeout on the couch routine. I stopped at the grocery store, bought things that required actual effort. Pasta from scratch, a proper sauce, the kind of meal that takes 40 minutes and makes the apartment smell like something that matters. And then I came home and Cassie was on the couch texting, and she tilted her phone screen down when she heard my key in the door. It was a small thing. Maybe it meant nothing. I told myself it meant nothing. I said, "Hey," and she said, "Hey," and her phone went face down on the cushion and she smiled and asked how my day was, and I answered, and we talked, and I cooked dinner. And it was a perfectly normal evening. But some part of me filed it away, the way your body files away the faint smell of smoke before your mind bothers to look for the fire. The movement, the screen angling down, the half-second of something in her eyes before the smile. I didn't ask about it that night. I made dinner. We watched something. She fell asleep on my shoulder, and I told myself I was being paranoid. That was May. By July, I wasn't telling myself that anymore. And the reason I wasn't telling myself that anymore had nothing to do with catching her at anything, or finding a message, or assembling a case. It had to do with the cumulative weight of small things. The way she started keeping her phone charger on her side of the bed instead of in the kitchen where it always used to be. The way she started taking calls in the other room when she used to just take them wherever she was. The way she had started, gradually and almost imperceptibly, managing me, giving me just enough warmth to keep things smooth, but no longer the kind of warmth that comes without calculation. The managed warmth is the thing that tips you off, in the end. You can't always name it, but you feel the difference between someone who loves you freely and someone who is rationing it. She had started spending more evenings at her friend Brooke's apartment. At first it was once or twice a week. Then it was almost every other night. Not coming home late, just not being home. Brooke's going through something. Cassie told me in early July. I want to be there for her. I said that was fine. Because it was fine. I trusted Cassie. I liked Brooke. I wasn't the kind of person who needed to track his fiancée's location every hour. But I was also the kind of person who paid attention. And what I was paying attention to was not where Cassie was. It was the version of her that came home afterward. Quieter. Slightly guilty looking in a way I couldn't name. Like someone who had been somewhere they needed to process before they could fully be present again. I want to be fair here, because this is the part where it's easy to turn into a resentful narrator painting everyone as a villain. Cassie wasn't a villain. She was someone who, somewhere along the way, had started feeling something she didn't know how to handle. And instead of bringing it to me, she went silent with it. That's not evil. That's human. That's terrifying and painful. And it cost me something I don't fully know how to measure, but it wasn't evil. What I could not live with, what I did not plan to simply absorb, was what she was choosing to do with whatever she was feeling, which was nothing. Say nothing. Do nothing. Let the wedding loom on the calendar like an asteroid nobody wanted to name out loud. I brought it up twice before the text. The first time was a Sunday evening in late July. We were washing dishes, one of those quiet domestic moments that feel significant in retrospect. The kind of moment where nothing is happening, nothing is wrong on the surface, and yet the air between two people has a particular texture that suggests everything under the surface is in motion. I passed her a bowl to dry. She dried it. I said, "You seem like you're somewhere else lately." She said, "I'm just stressed about the wedding logistics." I said, "Is it only that?" She paused. The pause was probably 2 seconds. It felt much longer. Then she smiled. Not her real smile, the smaller, managed version, and said, "Of course. What else would it be?" I let it go. I let it go because I didn't want to be the man who turns a dish-drying moment into an interrogation. I let it go because some part of me was not ready for whatever the alternative answer might have been. I let it go because I still loved her, and love makes you want to give one more benefit of one more doubt, just a little longer. The second time was 2 weeks later. We'd had a small argument about something irrelevant, whose turn it was to deal with the landlord about a maintenance issue, some minor bureaucratic thing that didn't matter at all, and that we both knew didn't matter at all, which made the argument worse somehow. It escalated faster than it should have. Not to anything dramatic. We didn't throw things. We didn't say anything unforgivable. But there was an edge to it that hadn't existed in our earlier arguments. A clipping, deliberate quality. Like she was arguing from a place of already decided rather than present frustration. When it was over, she went quiet in that deep way, the kind of quiet that has weight to it. It settles into a room the way weather settles. I sat down across from her on the couch. I said, "Cassie, whatever is going on with you, I'd rather hear it now than later." She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. It was not nothing. It was a decision being made in real time, whether to say the thing or not say the thing, whether to choose honesty or choose another few weeks of managed distance. Something moved. Then it passed. "Nothing is going on," she said. "I'm fine. I just need to decompress." I nodded. I did not push. And that night, alone with my own thoughts while she slept, I started doing the one thing I had been resisting for weeks. I started letting myself consider the possibility that we were not going to make it to October. Let me tell you something about that particular realization. It doesn't arrive like a bomb. It doesn't shatter you. It seeps in, slowly, the way water gets under a door. And once it's in, it doesn't leave. I started, quietly and without telling anyone, to make a mental inventory. Not of what Cassie had done wrong, but of what I would do if the thing I was sensing was real. I had a job, a good one, mid-level manager at a consulting firm. 3 weeks before that late-night text arrived, my boss had mentioned, almost casually, that there was an opening at our Chicago office. Senior role. Better title. Better salary. Something to think about, he'd said. I had smiled politely and said I'd consider it. Then I had gone home and not mentioned it to Cassie. Not out of secrecy. out of self-preservation. Some part of me already knew there might be a version of my near future where that door mattered. The night the text came, we hadn't argued. That's the part that stays with me. We hadn't fought. Nothing dramatic had happened. She'd been at Brooks again that evening. She came home around 10:30, said she was tired, went to bed before I did. I stayed up, reading, thinking. Around midnight, I turned off the light too. And at 1:47 a.m. my phone lit up. I need time to understand what my heart wants. I want to describe what that sentence does to a person. It's a sentence that is designed, whether consciously or not, to leave the door open. I need time. Not, I'm leaving. Not, I don't love you. Not even, I have feelings for someone else. Just time. And what my heart wants. Like she didn't know yet. Like she was still deciding. Like maybe if I waited patiently enough, played the right notes, said the right things, her heart might want me. I understood exactly what that sentence was. It was an invitation to audition. It was asking me to become the man who texts back at 2 a.m. and says, "Take all the time you need. I'll be here. Please don't go." It was asking me to hold very, very still while she figured out whether I was worth coming back to. I sat with that for 40 minutes. Then I typed my reply. What I sent was this. "Okay, take all the time you need. I hope you find clarity." That's it. 11 words back. No question marks. No "can we talk?" attached. No "I love you" at the end. Just clear, simple, factual acknowledgement. I put the phone down and went to sleep. I know how that sounds. I know some people will read that and think I was cold, or that I didn't fight for her, or that a man who loves a woman doesn't just send 11 words and go to sleep. Here is what I would say to that. I had already tried to open the door twice. She had stood on the other side of it and told me nothing was there. She had spent months telling me she was fine. She had come home night after night carrying something invisible and offered me none of it. And then at 1:47 in the morning, 6 weeks before our wedding, she decided to introduce the concept of what my heart wants via text message while lying 2 feet away from me in the same bed. There is no fight worth having in that moment. There is only the decision about who you are going to be in response to it. I chose to be someone who didn't beg. The next morning she woke up before me. I heard her in the kitchen, the sound of the coffee maker, the particular way her feet moved across the tile floor. In 3 years of living together, you learn the exact vocabulary of another person's movement. The sound of their specific footsteps, the weight distribution, the shuffle toward the bathroom before any lights are turned on. You know all of it. And you know it so well that you almost stop noticing it. Until the morning you are lying in bed knowing that everything has changed, and then every sound is painfully precise again, painfully present. The way things are when you understand you might be hearing them for the last time. I got up. I walked out. She was standing at the counter with her mug, and when she saw me, something complicated happened in her expression. Relief and guilt and something that looked almost like hope. The hope that my face would give her something she could work with. She opened her mouth. I said, "Good morning." Ordinary words. Neutral in tone. She said, "Did you get my text?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I think we should talk." And I said, "Whenever you're ready." I poured myself coffee. I sat down at the table and opened my laptop. Not because I had anything pressing to do. Because I needed something to do with my hands while I waited for her to decide how to begin. She stood at the counter for a minute, and I could feel her expecting something more from me. Some reach across the room, some emotional opening that she could walk through. She wanted me to ask. She wanted me to be the one who cracked the space open because it was easier to walk through a door someone else had opened than to open it yourself. I didn't give it to her. Not out of cruelty. Out of the understanding that if she had something to say, she had to be the one to say it first this time. She had been choosing silence for 3 months. This moment belonged to her. "I've been feeling confused," she said finally. She sat down across from me. "About us?" I asked it calmly. She nodded slowly. I said, "How long?" She looked at her coffee cup. "A few months." And there it was. Not a bomb. A confirmation. A few months. Which meant, at minimum, since May. Since the tilted phone screen. Since the evenings at Brooks. Since all those moments I had filed away and told myself were nothing. I said, "Is there someone else involved?" She paused just long enough. "It's not that simple," she said. "There's someone at work who I've been talking to. A lot. And I don't know what that means or what it is. But it's made me realize I have feelings I don't fully understand. Someone at work. Let me sit with that for a second. Someone at work. Not a stranger. Someone she saw on a daily basis. Someone she had apparently been having enough emotional conversation with over enough months that she now needed time to understand what her heart wanted. I took a slow breath. I said, "What do you want to happen?" She said, "I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out." I said, "That's not an answer I can build anything on, Cassie." She said, "I know. I know that. I need time. I'm not saying it's over. I'm saying I need space to think." I looked at her across the table, and I said, "I'm going to need you to understand something. I'm not going to wait in suspension while you decide whether the other option is better. That's not fair to either of us." She said, "I'm not asking you to wait forever." I said, "You are, though. That's exactly what I need time means." She didn't answer. Here is what I knew in that moment that she didn't know I knew. I knew what her "I need time" actually was. It wasn't confusion. Confusion doesn't last 3 months while your fiancé sleeps next to you, oblivious. What she was experiencing was the early intoxication of something new, the chemical electricity of someone fresh, someone without shared history, someone who didn't know what she looked like at 7 a.m. or how she handled stress or which drawer she kept the takeout menus in. That's not confusion. That's infatuation wearing the costume of confusion, because infatuation can't look you in the eyes and say its real name. And her hope, the unspoken architecture behind the text message in this conversation, was that I would agree to become background noise while she figured out if the new thing was real. I understood her. I even, in some removed way, had compassion for her. But I was not going to be background noise for anyone. The conversation lasted about an hour. She cried. Not dramatically, just quiet tears, the kind that fall when someone knows they've broken something and aren't sure yet how much it matters to them. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I sat across the table and I listened, and I spoke. And at the end I said, "I love you. I have loved you for 3 years. And I'm not going to make this ugly. But I am not going to pretend there is a version of what you're describing where we move forward as if nothing happened, either." She said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means I'm going to give you exactly what you asked for. Time." She blinked. "But not on pause," I said. "Time moves for both of us, or it moves for neither of us." She didn't fully understand what I meant then. She would, later. That afternoon I called the venue. The ceremony hall downtown. I had put down the deposit 8 months ago. One of those milestone moments where the wedding felt real, where I had handed over a check and felt a specific kind of happy that is not like any other kind of happy. It is the happy of having arrived somewhere you had been heading, of standing in a large clean room and being able to picture the people you love filling it, of briefly being the person in your own life story that you always hoped you would turn out to be. I called and I canceled. The person on the phone, a coordinator named Sandra who had been pleasant and professional at every prior interaction, asked if I was sure. I said I was. There was a cancellation fee. I paid it without negotiating. Not because I had money to spare, but because the conversation needed to end, and because the conversation ending felt, in some irrational but necessary way, like the moment where the decision became entirely real. As long as the venue was reserved, there was still technically a wedding. After the call ended, there wasn't. I sat in the parking lot of a grocery store for 20 minutes after I hung up, not doing anything, just sitting. The engine was off. The radio was off. I watched a woman push a cart to her car and load bags into her trunk. Watched a man stand outside his car, eating something out of a paper bag. The world moving at its regular pace. Indifferent and continuous and entirely unaware that somewhere in a parking lot, a man was sitting in the wreckage of a future and learning, in real time, what it weighed. It didn't feel like grief exactly. It felt like setting down something that had become heavier than I'd admitted to myself. The way your arm aches after you finally put down a bag you've been carrying for too long. The ache that tells you the weight was there all along. You just weren't allowing yourself to feel it. I didn't tell Cassie I'd canceled it. Not right away. She had moved to Brooks. Temporarily, we both said, though I think we both knew the word was doing a lot of work. I had our apartment. I had the quiet. I had, for the first time in several months, the clarity that comes when the thing you've been dreading finally just becomes a fact. The dread is gone. It's replaced by something harder but cleaner. I called my friend Owen that evening. Owen had known me since college, had been at every major turn in my adult life, and was constitutionally incapable of telling me what I wanted to hear instead of what I needed to hear. I told him what happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I canceled the hall today." Another pause. "Good," he said. I said, "There's a job offer in Chicago. Senior role." He said, "How long have you had that offer?" I said, 3 weeks. He said, "And you didn't tell her?" I said, "No." He thought about that. Then he said, You were already preparing. I didn't answer. He said, "That's not a judgment. That's just an observation." He was right. I had been preparing. Not consciously, not in any calculated way, but the body knows things before the mind will admit them. I had been holding that Chicago offer in a quiet corner of my thoughts for weeks, not acting on it, not dismissing it, just keeping it. The way you keep an umbrella in your bag on a day with no clouds. Just in case. I called my boss the next day. I told him I was interested in the Chicago position. He sounded surprised, not unpleasantly. He said he'd need 2 weeks to make things formal. I said that worked. I started, quietly and methodically, the process of untangling a shared life. The apartment was in my name. I had moved in first. She had joined me. I didn't ask her to rush. I gave her a month. I organized what was mine, boxed what was shared, noted what was hers. I did it with the same energy I used to finish a project at work. Systematic, clear-headed, not rushed, not emotional in the operational sense. Internally, I was not a robot. Internally, I was going through the specific grief of dismantling a future you had spent 3 years building toward. But I had learned long ago that the place where grief does the most damage is in paralysis. I refused to be paralyzed. Cassie texted me twice in the first week. The first text said, "Can we talk?" I replied, "Sure. What do you need to say?" She said, "Not over text. In person." I said, "I'm available Thursday evening if you want to come by." She came Thursday evening. She sat an hour, in my living room, and she looked around at the subtle rearrangements I'd been making, and she looked at me, and she said, "You're already packing." I said some things. She said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm taking a position in Chicago." The silence that followed that sentence was the loudest silence I have experienced in my adult life. She stared at me. She said, "What? When did you decide this?" I said, "I accepted the offer this week." She said, "You didn't even tell me you were considering it." I said, "You asked for time, Cassie. I'm giving you time. But I'm not giving you a version of time where I put my life on pause and wait here for a verdict." She started to cry, harder than she had the first morning. She said, "I didn't mean for this to happen. I wasn't trying to lose you. I just needed to understand what I was feeling." I said, "I know that." She said, "So how can you just leave?" And I said something then that I had been holding for a long time. I said, "Cassie, you've been emotionally elsewhere for 3 months. You chose to spend that time talking to someone else instead of talking to me. You sent me a text at 1:47 in the morning that was designed to hold me in place while you figured out your options. You are not losing me. You already chose something. I'm just finally hearing it." She said, "That's not fair." I said, "Maybe not, but it's honest." She said something else that night that I want to address, because it's the part of this story that I think a lot of people will recognize. She said, "I just need to know that if I choose you, you'll still want me." I heard that sentence clearly. I heard what it actually meant. It meant, I want to know you'll be there at the end of this, waiting, so I can compare my options with a safety net. And I understood, I truly understood, that she wasn't being deliberately manipulative. She was just afraid. She had tangled herself up in something she didn't fully understand, and now she was scared of losing both things, and her fear looked exactly like the request that I not move. I sat with it for a moment. Then I said, "I'm not going to answer that question, because answering it is the same as agreeing to be your fallback. And I'm not that." She cried more. I handed her a tissue. I said, "I don't hate you. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I have to respect myself enough to keep moving, regardless of what you decide." She left that evening without a resolution, which was, I think, what she had been hoping to avoid. She had wanted to come and find me in some compromised state, worried, desperate enough to negotiate. What she found instead was someone who had already accepted reality and was building the next thing. That's the version of me she hadn't expected. And I think, walking back to her car, she started to sense, for the first time, that the window she had been assuming was open indefinitely might actually have a closing mechanism. I moved to Chicago on a Tuesday in late September, 8 days before what would have been our wedding. I'm not going to romanticize that timing. It was not poetic. It was practical. That was when the new apartment was ready, when the new role officially began. I drove the rental truck myself. Owen helped me load it. He had driven up the night before, just showed up, rang my buzzer, said, "I'm helping tomorrow." That's Owen. He doesn't ask what you need. He just shows up and does the thing. We loaded in the morning. The efficient, wordless operation of 2 people who have helped each other move before. We didn't talk much that day, He knew better than to fill the silence with things I didn't need to hear. When we were done, the apartment was empty of everything that was mine. The space shaped only by what I was taking and what I was leaving. Owen stood in the doorway. He shook my hand, pulled me in for one of those one-armed hugs, and said, "You're going to be all right." I said, "I know." And I meant it. Not in the bravado way. In the factual way. The kind of knowing that comes after grief has done its work and left behind something simpler on the other side. Something like direction. The first few weeks in Chicago were exactly as strange as relocation always is. New coffee places. New commute. Learning which grocery store to trust. Learning the soundscape of a new apartment. Which radiator knocks. Which floorboard creaks. Which neighbor has a dog that barks at exactly 6 a.m. You learn a new city the way you learn a new language. Badly at first. With effort. With the particular self-consciousness of someone who doesn't yet know the shortcuts. The strangeness was mostly a relief. Strange was better than familiar but broken. Strange kept the brain occupied. Strange demanded presence in a way that comfort never does. At work, the new role was absorbing in exactly the way I needed it to be, complex enough to demand focus, new enough to require real attention, important enough that failing at it was not an acceptable option. I was good at my job, had always been, but there is a version of you that shows up post-upheaval that is sharper than the baseline version. When your personal life has been simplified down to zero, your professional life becomes very clear. There is no background noise. There is nothing to bring home from work and deposit into a shared space. There is only the work. I was making better decisions in those weeks than I had in a year. Cleaner thinking. Faster calls. My new team noticed. My boss, remote, in the home office, sent me a note in my third week saying the transition was exceeding expectations. I read it in my still mostly unfurnished apartment. Ate takeout on a box because my table hadn't arrived yet. Felt something that was not quite pride and not quite sadness, but something in between that didn't have an easy name. Cassie texted once in September, 2 days before the date that had been our wedding day. She said, "I keep thinking about Saturday." I read it. I didn't reply, not out of cruelty. There was nothing honest I could say to that message that wouldn't either be cold or give her false signal. If I said, "I know," that was an invitation. If I said, "Me too," that was worse. If I said nothing, that was its own kind of answer. I chose nothing. Saturday came. The first Saturday in October. It was a gray day in Chicago, overcast and cool, the kind of fall morning that smells like wet pavement and wood smoke from somewhere up the block. I worked in the morning, answered emails, reviewed a project document that needed revisions, ate lunch at my desk. Then in the afternoon, I went for a run along the lakefront. Chicago's lakefront is remarkable in the way that large bodies of water always are when you need them to just be large and indifferent. The lake doesn't care what day it is. The waves don't hold their shape for you. The horizon doesn't make accommodations. It's just there, vast and continuing and entirely unmoved by whatever you're carrying. I ran for about an hour. I thought about Cassie. I thought about the hall downtown, the big windows, the hardwood floors, the way the afternoon light would have fallen across the room. I thought about the 70 people who would have been there. I thought about my father, who had called me when I told him the wedding was off and hadn't said much, but had cleared his throat twice in a row, which is his version of profound sadness. I thought about Portugal, the hotel I had saved on my phone, the neighborhood in Lisbon I had researched, the image I had of the two of us in a city neither of us had been to, being the kind of couple that goes somewhere new together and learns it together. I let myself feel all of that. Standing by the water with my hands on my knees, breathing. I let it be real. I let it hurt. And then I went home and made dinner and watched something unremarkable and went to bed. Life is mostly unremarkable. That's not a complaint. That's the mercy of it. The unremarkable days carry you through. Now I need to tell you about what was happening on Cassie's side. Because this story has two timelines, and you need both of them. What I know partly from what she later told me, and partly from what Owen told me, and partly from what Brooke, who is a better person than some people in this story, myself included, gave her credit for, eventually let slip. What happened was this. The person at work, his name was Callum, I found out eventually, late 20s, recently divorced, had responded to Cassie's emotional availability with the full intensity of someone who is himself lonely and looking for connection. It was real, what she felt. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. It was real the way early infatuation is always real, vivid and persuasive and chemical. But here is what infatuation does not tell you. It does not tell you that the vividness has an expiration date. It does not tell you that the thing that makes someone exciting at the beginning is the same thing that will make them exhausting later. It does not tell you that the man you are comparing them to has been discounted in your mind precisely because you know him, and knowing someone, truly knowing someone, is not a disadvantage. It's the whole point. By November, 2 months after what would have been our wedding, things with Callum had already shifted. Cassie had, I believe, expected that once the obstacle of the engagement was removed, something definitive and clarifying would emerge. What emerged instead was the reality of Callum as an actual person rather than an emotional concept. He was good-looking, apparently, charming when he wanted to be, also inconsistent, also not quite sure what he wanted, also, and this is the detail that I think hit Cassie the hardest, also not particularly interested in building anything. He was interested in the current moment, the dinner, the conversation, the evening. He was not interested in the Saturday morning logistics. He was not interested in the way a shared life actually works when it becomes shared. He was, in short, very good at the part of a relationship that happens in the honeymoon stage, and absolutely absent for the parts that come after. I want to be careful here not to write this as triumphant. It would be very easy to write this next part as, she chose the wrong guy, she lost everything, lesson learned, karma delivered. That's not the story. The story is more complicated than that, and more human, and ultimately more worth telling. Because here is what I think actually happened. Cassie, at 27, had arrived at that specific and frightening crossroads where the future you are about to have suddenly feels immovable. A wedding in October. An apartment. A person who loves you and is good and is building a life toward you. And instead of sitting with the terror of commitment, which is what it was, and walking through it, she looked for an exit door. Not because she didn't love me, but because love alone doesn't insulate you from fear. And Callum was the exit door that presented itself. He wasn't better than me. He was just elsewhere. He was the sensation of not being locked in. And she chose the sensation. And then the sensation ended. I found out she called Owen in early December. He told me about it, because that's the kind of friend Owen is. He said she had called asking if I was okay. Asking if I had moved on, his words. He said he had been honest with her. He said, I told her you were doing well. That you had a good thing going in Chicago. That I hadn't seen you this clear in a long time. I asked him what she said. He said she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, I didn't think he'd actually go. I sat with that for a while. I didn't think he'd actually go. There it is. That sentence is the entire key to this story. She had sent that text, and she had told me she needed time, and she had watched me move through the following conversations, and somewhere underneath all of it, she had been operating on the assumption that I would not actually leave. That I would hold my position, that the city would stay the same, the apartment would stay the same, my emotional availability would stay the same. And when she finally resolved her confusion, she would come back and find everything intact. She had not actually believed I would go. And here is the thing about that assumption. It's not a malicious one. It's an honest one. Because in most of the stories like ours, in most of the situations, I want to tell you about the part of this story that didn't involve Cassie at all. Because that's the part of the story that matters most to me. When I arrived in Chicago, I was not arriving as a victor. I was not a man who had triumphed in some battle of wills. I was a 30-year-old who had just dissolved a 3-year relationship and canceled a wedding and packed up his life and driven to a city where he knew exactly one person. A work contact named Victor who had agreed to grab a beer and show me the neighborhood on my first weekend. I was not triumphant. I was starting over, which is terrifying, which is also, and I want to be precise about this, the most alive I had felt in a very long time. There is something about starting over in a new city that forces you to stop autopiloting. Every small thing requires decision. Which route to take, which place to try, who to talk to. You can't coast on established habit. You are required to be present. I started running in the mornings, something I had fallen out of in the last year of the relationship, the year of shared schedules and accumulated smallness. I started cooking properly again. I started reading before bed instead of lying awake thinking about the distance that had grown between me and Cassie. I re-engaged with the part of work I genuinely loved, the problem-solving part, the strategy part, the part where I was actually good and I knew it. I called Owen once a week. I met Victor's friend group and found several people who, I think, I will know for a long time. I was, slowly, non-linearly, in the 2 steps forward 1 step back way of actual human experience, becoming someone I recognized again. And in February, almost 6 months after the late-night text, I met someone. I want to be careful about how I tell this part. I'm not going to make her the redemption arc. She's not a plot device. She's a person. Her name is Petra. She works in urban planning, reads voraciously, thinks more carefully before she speaks than anyone I've encountered in a long time. We met at a dinner party hosted by Victor. We talked for 2 hours in a corner of his apartment about everything except our romantic histories. She made me laugh, the real kind, not the polite kind. I drove home that night and sat in my car outside my building for 10 minutes, just noticing the fact that something had shifted, not in a rushing, drowning way, in a quiet, clear way, in the way water finds its level. I didn't rush anything with Petra. We had coffee 3 days later, dinner the week after. We moved at the pace of two people who have both been through enough to know that the early period should be savored rather than consumed. She knew I had come out of an engagement. I knew she had her own history, her own set of conclusions. We were both careful. We were both, underneath the carefulness, genuinely happy to have found the other. I told Owen about her in March. He said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Like something is beginning rather than ending." He said that was a good sign. I think he was right. Here is what I want to say about the time. Cassie asked for time. She asked for it as though it were a fixed pool, something that would wait in a container while she decided what to do with it. But time is not like that. Time is the thing that doesn't ask your permission. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't hold its breath while you figure out your feelings. It keeps moving, for everyone, simultaneously, without regard for who is ready. The version of me she expected to find when she'd sorted herself out, the one standing in the old apartment, in the old city, in the same emotional place she'd left him, that version did not exist. Because while she was having her experience, I was having mine. And mine had taken me somewhere real. Somewhere I hadn't expected. Somewhere that, I think, I had been heading for longer than I knew. Because sometimes the thing that breaks you open is just the thing that forces you to start walking toward where you actually belong. I heard through the mutual friend pipeline, Owen, mostly, that Cassie had, in the spring, started therapy. Not for us. For herself. Working through the fear that had driven the whole episode. I was glad to hear that. Not smugly glad. Genuinely glad. Because here is the truth. I cared about Cassie for 3 years, and that doesn't vanish because the relationship ends. I don't wish her harm. I don't wish her emptiness. I hope she does the work. I hope she figures out what the fear was actually about. I hope she finds someone she can be honest with before the deadline. I mean all of that. But here is also the truth. Hope for her and building something of my own are not in conflict. I do not have to be bitter in order to have been right. I do not have to wish her failure in order to justify my choices. I canceled the haul. I took the job. I drove to Chicago, not because I wanted to hurt her, because I knew that staying, in suspension, waiting for a verdict on my own worth, would hollow me out from the inside. And I was not going to let that happen. There is one last thing I want to tell you, and it is the thing that I think is actually the center of this whole story, underneath all the other things. About a month ago, I was running by the lake. It was early, that particular gray-blue Chicago morning light that I have come to love in a way I didn't expect, and I thought about that night. The blue light of my phone in the dark bedroom. 1:47 a.m. Those 11 words. And I thought about myself lying there, taking 40 minutes to decide what kind of person to be. I thought about what I had been afraid of in those 40 minutes. Not losing her. Not the venue. Not the Portugal trip. Not the version of the future I had been constructing. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to do it. That when it came down to it, I would be the person who sent the desperate paragraph. The long, late night, "Please tell me what this means. Please tell me there's a way back. Please don't make me face what this might be" message. Because that's what I wanted to send. That's the honest part. Somewhere in those 40 minutes, the version of me that was afraid was composing that message. And the version of me that I wanted to be was very slowly and very quietly talking him out of it. That version won. By a margin that felt, at the time, uncomfortably slim. And running by the lake in the early light, I was glad. Not triumphant. Not vindicated. Just glad. Glad that the version of me that knew better had held his nerve long enough to type those 11 calm words and go to sleep. Because it turns out that the distance between who you are and who you are capable of being is sometimes exactly the length of one text message. Exactly the width of 40 minutes of stillness in the dark. Exactly as far as a car can drive from one city to another when you've decided that staying is the thing you cannot afford. Cassie needed time to understand what her heart wanted. I gave it to her. I gave it to myself too. And the thing about time, the thing she learned and I already knew, somewhere I didn't fully have the language for yet, is that it doesn't pause for anyone. It doesn't hold the city still. It doesn't keep the apartment warm. It doesn't freeze the man in place while you come back to claim him. It moves. It moved for her. It moved for me. It moved for Petra. It moved for every person in every corner of this story, simultaneously, without sentiment, without apology. And if you're lucky, if you refuse to waste it waiting to be chosen, it moves you somewhere better than where you were. That's the story. That's all of it. The text at 1:47. The 11 words I sent back. The venue call. The drive north. The lake in the morning. The person I am becoming. The life that doesn't pause.